Hello. So I'm Louise, and I'm your tutor for the Management Case Study exams for November 2025 and February 2026. So we've got a set of recordings now where we're going to go through the pre-scene information, all about our company, Ressett. And each of these is going to go through different aspects of the pre-scene. We'll look at the financial information. We'll look at the competitor that we are given as well, fix up. And the aim of this is to help guide you through the pre-scene and pull out some of those important pieces of information and ideas that we can get from it. Now, it's important for us to first of all understand why we are going to look through this pre-scene and why we need to really understand what we are told about Resset. So understanding the pre-scene, I think there are three main reasons why it's really important that you make sure that you're happy with all the information that we have been given in advance of the exam. First of all, really critical is that you understand that in this exam, you're going to be asked to apply your E2, F2 and P2 knowledge in as real life a scenario as is possible in an exam. So to do that, you're going to apply that knowledge to Resset. Now, what that means is if you're going to be talking about project management or negotiation or accounting for a acquisition of a subsidiary, you are going to give your opinion and your points about those technical areas, but always in relation to the company Resset. You are being asked to apply your knowledge. You're not being asked in this exam to explain technical theories. You're being asked to give your opinion as a finance manager about these various areas that you are an expert on. So every point you make in the exam must relate to Resset. It must be a feasible point, a sensible point, a point that really does relate to what Resset does and how it currently does it, what its current challenges are, and what the current opportunities are for it. So it's not about just relating your theory to any company. It's about really applying and relating it to this particular organization. And of course, it's really important as a qualified accountant that you will be able to do that, that you'll be able to give advice that is relevant to the company that you're working for. So that's why we need to understand about this company. Now, the second reason for really understanding this pre-scene and thinking about it is to try to anticipate what could come up in the exam. What might the examiner test? How could he test things? What kind of scenarios could he envisage? And if we look at this pre-scene now and we read it and understand it, you should reread it again a couple of times and think about it as you're doing that. Various different ideas will come to our minds. And as we're going through it today, we will look at those potential ideas that we see today, but more will come to light as we read it again and as we think about it a bit more. Now, if we can anticipate what might be asked in the exam, of course, it won't be a surprise on exam day. We might have already thought about this scenario. We might already have thought about the area of E2, P2 or F2 that we are being asked about in the exam, because reading the pre-scene can help pinpoint those areas that can be tested in the exam. Now, the third reason for reading this pre-scene, understanding it, really thinking about it, is to give you confidence. You are a finance manager at Ressett. That is what you now have to believe. You understand everything about Ressett very well, and you will do if you read and understand this pre-scene and think about it. What that means is in the exam, when you make a point that you think is a good point, you should be able to do that with confidence and really explain and justify and argue that point. You will get good marks in this exam for applying your knowledge, really explaining it practically, sensibly, and justifying why it's a good point to make for Resset. And if you're confident that you understand what Resset does and how it does it and the current challenges and the issues, you will be able to do that arguing and that justification because you will feel confident that you have valid points to make. So that's the third reason for going through this pre-scene and really understanding what this company is all about and what the industry is all about as well. So let's just start by looking at the first few paragraphs. Now, it's important just as we do that to remind ourselves of this context statement. And this context statement by CIMA just points out that you do not need to know about current global issues. We know in the world there are current issues, and there have been over the past few years, of course, big issues that have really affected companies, industries, countries in which a company may be based. None of those are relevant to your exam. In essence, this company is operating in a real life type of industry, but in a fictitious world where none of the real life global issues that happen and are affecting real companies today will affect Ressett. Okay. So if we just look at the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, the paragraphs look very similar to how the pre-scene always starts. We have a little introduction. Now, first of all, in the introduction, it tells us that Resset buys new and used personal computers and related products, and it sells them to individuals, consumers like you or me. It sells them to companies, corporates, and also to public sector customers. So perhaps to a health service, perhaps like the NHS in the UK, or to police forces. It buys them in bulk and it resells them. And it resells them at significantly cheaper prices than consumers could buy from retailers or that corporates or public sector customers could buy from the existing new retailers or manufacturers. It tells us that Resset's in Lamland, a completely fictitious company, but important, it tells us that it's only present in Lamland. Now, what that means, of course, and I hope you can see the pointer there, is that that gives the examiner scope to suggest in the exam that Resset might decide to expand overseas. Now, we will see in a later recording that this market that Resset is in is very mature. Margins are thin. There's not a lot of scope for growing your profits in hugely by doing what Resset currently does, being a reseller. And therefore, it's possible that there might be a suggestion that Resset will decide to start selling overseas. Now, of course, that would present risk. Think P2. That would present potential F2 scenarios if Resset decided to expand overseas through acquisition of a reseller in a country, perhaps a neighbouring country. We would then have consolidation of a foreign currency subsidiary. So We are going to think about points like that as we go through the pre-scene. So, possibility of expansion out into other countries. Now, so I thought when I read the pre-scene that it mentions later, as we will see, that as Resset is a reseller, of course, they have to source PCs. They source used PCs, they source nearly new ones, they source new ones, currently boxed, unopened, but they are sourcing these PCs and they're sourcing them from Lamland. Now, it does point out later on that there is only really scope for 2 resellers in Lamland. Now, it could be, of course, that Resset might be able to source PCs from overseas. That might be another route for expansion, being able to access a greater supply of the PCs it needs to resell through buying from overseas. Now, it tells us that the Lamland dollar is the currency, and it tells us that company law requires IFRSs to be used. Of course, that tells us that all of your F2 accounting standard knowledge can be tested in management case. And that is an area that is often poorly done by students in the real exam. So, a warning right away, you must make sure that you revise your F2 accounting knowledge. Okay, now it doesn't tell us in these first 2 paragraphs that Ressett is a listed entity. And in previous pre-scenes where the company is listed on the stock market, it tells us that in the first paragraph. It does not tell us that. Therefore, we can assume that it's not actually a quoted, a listed company. Well, so what? Well, what that does mean is that sources of funding, debt and equity, are slightly restricted in terms of if it's not listed, it can't make a public offering of its shares on the stock market. It can still raise equity funds, of course, because it could perhaps offer them to the existing shareholders, a rights issue. But it couldn't issue its shares more widely on the stock market. It would appear that Resset is not listed. So that does essentially just give us a different view on the sources of funding. Now, when we look later at the financials, we can see that Resset does have debt funding in existence. And of course, it does have share capital. So it does make use of both types of funding at the moment. And it might need more funds going forward. Regularly tested, asking you to explain the pros and cons of debt and equity funding, sometimes suggesting specific types of debt and equity funding. And of course, you, being a finance manager at Ressett, will be able to give those pros and cons, but in relation to the amount of funding that's needed, Ressett's current situation, whether shareholders might want to put more money in because of what you've read, you can put your answer in context. You can apply your answer. Okay, now what we've read in those first 2 paragraphs makes it clear that Resset is a reseller. It buys its PCs from large retailers, from manufacturers directly, and from businesses who've got a whole load of PCs and they wish to replace them. That is the source for Resset of its supplies. It then sells those to businesses and to consumers. So Resset really is an intermediary, and that's what I wanted to point out here. It's a very important point, really. Resset is stuck in the middle of some really big, powerful supplying companies, the PC retailers, the manufacturers of those PCs, who could, if they wish to, do their own reselling of used computers, who could decide to sell off their old models themselves rather than selling them to this reseller. Resset is an intermediary. Its customers, some of them are very big businesses. Uh, the public sector, again, it's in the middle of some big customers and some big suppliers. And it is quite possible that any of those retailers or manufacturers could decide to cut out this intermediary to do what Resset does themselves. Now, at the moment, of course, Resset is one of two resellers in Lamland, and there is no suggestion that that's going to happen. But what it makes me really think about is how tight the margins are in this industry as a reseller. You've got these big, powerful supplying companies. You've got the constant possibility that they could decide to do what you're doing themselves. You've got these big customers, when I'm thinking about the business customers, and margins are tight. It's also a mature industry. We can see already, I think, that things like cost control are going to be vital if we're going to make any profit in this industry. Management of working capital, really, really good decision making. And then developing perhaps services, reputation for quality, developing a differentiated offering that causes the customer to keep coming back to Resset. It's going to be very important. Okay, then. Now, just a reminder that as a finance manager, you're not going to be deciding strategy. You're not sitting on the board. But what you are doing is you are giving advice. You are giving advice about financing, about risk, about the financial reporting implications of a new strategy. You are monitoring a new strategy, KPIs, devising them, working out what actually to report on from your business information system. You're helping implement strategy. You're deciding on effective leadership styles or an effective team. You're influencing top management by giving them your opinions. And of course, you're considering the external environment. You're considering stakeholders, competitors. All of these things are your role, and your E2, P2, and F2 knowledge is your toolkit. Okay, final point, just added in here, 2 or 3 real world examples. Now, this industry is actually in the real world dominated by a large number of small to medium-sized companies, resellers of PCs and IT equipment. And there are many of them in the UK. I've put a couple of those in my little box here. Now, I also included not a reseller, but AO World. So AO started off as a retailer of actually domestic appliances. So washing machines, fridges, those types of white goods. But why I've included AO is because they've diversified significantly. They acquired a reseller. They went into other types of goods. Now you can buy PCs from AO. They have expanded overseas. They have done a lot of very interesting, different kinds of growth across the years. They've used innovation in a really, really creative way, and they're continuously using innovation. I've just popped them in, not because they are similar in the way they do operate to Resset, but because they give you a wide range of ideas, really, about the types of opportunities there are in this industry and the kind of different ways of growing that there could be. In a later recording, we'll look at the industry itself in real life and go into some detail about the types of companies that are real life competitors. Now let's look at the products that Resset actually sells and also has to source, of course. We're going to look now at page number 3 of the pre-scene and just look at the background to this industry. So we're not looking specifically at Resset yet, but we're looking at the background to this industry. So of course, we're looking at personal computers. And on page 3 and also 4, it just explains the type of personal computers that can be supplied in this industry. Points out in the first paragraph that computers can be sold to people who have very little training in computing. They're sold to consumers in domestic settings who could be using computers for a whole variety of tasks. They could be using them for gaming. They could be using them for streaming videos, and they could be using them for the actual business use. If we have consumers who actually are self-employed, they could be using computers for teaching, for example, as I do. And of course, then there's lots of commercial organizations who are using PCs. And again, commercial organizations who use PCs in a whole wide range of for a whole wide range of uses. So we can think of course, offices, and we can think of people using PCs traditionally, analyzing information, emails, building models, writing reports, etc. But then again, we can think of more specialist companies who use desktop PCs, but also laptops and tablets in a variety of ways. We can think of, for example, the restaurant industry who have tablets which they use to take orders, to keep records of bills, also for payments. We can think of health service who use tablet PCs for people's notes. So their health notes and all those details, which then can be transferred between different specialists within a hospital, within a whole health service. We can think about product designers using design software on laptops. We can think of a whole load of different types of businesses who are buying a whole variety of hardware and also software for their staff. So although this is about personal computers, I just wanted you to really understand that actually there's a huge range of different types of customers here. And there is definitely the possibility of segmenting that market, specializing in one area or two areas, being a niche seller, perhaps to a certain industry. Now, when we read later, we don't get the feel that Resset is a niche operator in that way. They sell to a variety of business. They sell to lots of different consumers. And what I'm pointing out here is there might be a suggestion of going perhaps into one particular type of industry and trying to secure long-term contracts there. And it could be an industry, for example, as we said, in hospitality, or it could be in the health service, or in some kind of high-tech industry. So not everybody uses this hardware for the same purpose. Not everybody uses the same software on these hardware. Okay, little point at the top there. As the prices of PCs have come down over the years, and they have, PCs become more of a commodity. And what I mean by that is they start to be bought mainly by price, because the difference between the main brands of PC perhaps are narrowing. And rather than saying, I want to buy this make of desktop or laptop, customers are going, well, I want certain features, but what brand it is, I'm not really bothered about. And I want certain features and I can get them in loads of brands. So I'm going to focus on price. PC laptops are becoming more of a commodity. Now, there are some brands, of course, that stand out in the market. And there are some customers, both business and consumers, who are very loyal to certain brands. But there are fewer of those than there used to be. And certainly PCs as commodities is something that I think is quite an important point, because it would explain why there are tight margins for resellers in this industry, and also why if the reseller in this industry wants to grow wants to make more money, make more profit, they are going to have to differentiate themselves. They're going to have to create value in ways other than just selling on these commodities. They're going to have to offer additional things. Support. It points out, as it says in this paragraph, users often have no training. What about providing training and support to users of PCs who are not necessarily buying the PCs from Ressett? So a whole new line of income from services, support. What about providing extended warranties? Buyers, particularly consumers perhaps, may be very nervous when they buy PC that something might go wrong. It is still a relatively large purchase. It costs quite a bit to buy a new PC. So what about the possibility of Ressett, again, differentiating a way of growing, a way of increasing its income, a way of moving away from being solely focused on the selling of the hardware by offering extended warranties as a separate service, by offering training to businesses for their staff. So a bit of thought here about the route that Resset could grow, bearing in mind the tight margins that there are from reselling PCs in Lamland at the moment. Now, what is pointed out on this page is that there are the following types of personal computers. So we have desktops, we have laptops, and we have tablet PCs as the main three types of personal computer. So if we look at those three and just pull out some of those key points, of course, a desktop is not particularly portable. It's usually a large item. It really is focused on users who need to sit at a desk and spend a significant amount of time doing work on a PC. They are the best type of PC for the ergonomics, really, of spending 8 hours at a desk, typing and looking at a screen. They are perfect for those business users who need to do that. They're perfect for the consumer who is sitting, spending hours at a PC. But mainly they're suited for the workplace, and for the workplace where the staff are at the desk, not required to be out on site, not required to be walking around. Much easier for those types of workplace use would be a laptop or a tablet. Now, it points out that in the PC, in the desktop PC, we have processor, we have data storage, we have lots of components. Some more about that later. But the main point here to, of course, realise is risk. P2, risk, regularly tested. I mean, there is a significant risk here with this product. There are lots of components, any of which could fail. And when we think about that from Resset's perspective, firstly, it's going to be really important to source quality PCs. If they're sourcing PCs, particularly the new ones, which come in a box and Resset doesn't open them, they are sold as new, it's going to be very important to source those PCs from quality suppliers, where the risk of any element of that desktop failing is really low. Because, of course, it's Resset who is going to sell this, and they will get the reputational risk if there are failures of these PCs. Also, remember, Resset is a refurbisher of PCs. We'll see that later. We don't know really the amount of refurbishment that Resset do, but they do refurbish PCs, which means they also need to have supplies of the components that can be replaced within a desktop so that they can do that replacement. And again, sourcing quality supplies of the components within a desktop are going to be really vital for Resset. With thin margins, tight profits, there's no scope here for selling poor quality products. It's got to be top quality that doesn't fail. There can be no reputational risk here. We don't want lots of returns of goods because that would really eliminate the narrow margins that there are. Important point, of course, also here to think about is inventory management, because the reseller, Ressett, is going to hold significant amounts of inventory. And we can see that when we look at the financials. Of course, inventory management is going to be really important in terms of obsolescence. If Ressett ends up with some obsolete PCs that it can't sell, then they're going to have to write them down. Remember, inventory should always be measured at the lower of cost and net realizable value. So thinking about all of the items that Resset will have to hold, that it's buying in and then selling on, inventory management is very important. IS2, making sure that we would be able to discuss the accounting aspects of obsolescence risk for inventory, really important. Now, when we were mentioning before that Resset buys from retailers, from manufacturers, but also from businesses, we really are talking then, aren't we, about buying in bulk lots of desktop computers. And I've just pointed out here that the source of these desktops then from businesses is very much dependent on how often businesses refresh their PCs in the workplace. And that's often driven by upgrades to operating systems. Now, we know that from our own use of PCs, laptops, desktops, whatever, we might be using Windows, and we know that regularly there is a new Windows operating system. And over time, older hardware becomes not effective at using the newer operating system. So businesses will often refresh all of their PCs when it looks like support for an operating system, which is a bit old, is going to end. Similarly, businesses will replace their desktop PCs if they need better productivity, and newer PCs offer more productivity. And also, businesses might replace their desktop PCs when the maintenance of them becomes more and more costly. More things to fix, more patches to put on the old software. It becomes too onerous. So they refresh and renew their PCs. I just wanted to note that because what Resset is doing is it's buying in bulk from these businesses, and it can't do much about any when these businesses will sell PCs. All it can do is be really quick to negotiate good contracts, to have good relationships with these businesses, so that the first person that the business comes to is Resset in order to take the old PCs away. Resset is wholly dependent on when the businesses decide to do that desktop refresh, when they want to get rid of those desktops. So negotiation skills, contractual relationships, maintaining good relationships with those businesses, absolutely vital. Now, when we look at laptops, key points, of course, for laptops is they're more portable. So they lend themselves to consumers who would want to have a laptop that they can take around, take to school, take to university, use at home, take around with them. They're small, they're lightweight. Smaller ones, bigger ones, they have different size. There are different size laptops, of course. Bigger ones, less convenient to carry, but easier to use with a keyboard and for more regular use, perhaps. They are slightly less flexible than a desktop in terms of what you can do on a laptop. Just because they offer slightly less scope for arrangements of screens and keyboards. And also the processing power is often not enough for things like playing the latest video games, etc. So when it comes to selling desktops and laptops, let's just think about that for a moment. Of course, Resset is going to really have to be careful in really communicating to its potential customers what you can do with this laptop of a certain size, of a certain processing power, or of this desktop. Really important, E2, communication skills, accurate communication, both in terms of descriptions and also in terms of communication that a customer service advisor might give over the phone. Communication is going to be absolutely vital. Battery life, weight, size of product. Resset cannot afford to get those things wrong. So again, this is how an area of E2 could be tested in relation to Resset. Now, if we move on from that for a moment, still E2, of course, the advisors are going to have really good skill in order to be able to give the customers really good advice on what is the right laptop or desktop or even tablet to meet their needs. There is, as we can already see, a lot of variety here in terms of the processing power, memories, size of screen, ease of use, and that advice is going to be critical. So training, developing highly effective, skilled teams, advising customers, things that are all covered in E2, motivating staff, how we measure staff's performance in terms of advising customers, KPIs for them, all of this covered by E2, all really important. I've just put a little note here on the left that business demand, of course, for laptops is also high because depending upon what the industry is that their business is in or what the staff member is doing in that business, laptops will obviously be in great demand. Hybrid and remote working, of course, makes laptops more desirable. And of course, today there is much more hybrid and remote working than there was 15 years ago. So think about workers who work not in an office. So they might work, say, on a construction site. They still need technology. They still need information. We can think about, as I've already mentioned, people out in a hospital, a doctor. We can see that laptops definitely have a place in the workplace for certain types of jobs and certain types of industries. Again, businesses will replace these. So the more that they need perhaps workers to have portable technology, they will sell their desktops and they will invest in laptops. If they want improved performance of those laptops, if they want a nicer design and end user facing laptop, they're going to again refresh those laptops. Now I think is a good point to just mention sustainability, because of course there are significant sustainability concerns in this industry. The life cycle of technological products gets shorter and shorter. And what that traditionally would mean is they would get thrown away ever quicker and quicker. It's going to landfill. And when we think about this type of product going to landfill, of course, there are all kinds of contents within a PC that creates all kinds of issues in landfill. There are metals that create leaching into soil that can enter the waterways that are toxic. And these are not degradable items. So sustainability has become a bigger and bigger issue. So we need to think about things like product life cycle. Product with a short life cycle that then is useless at the end, that becomes a big problem. What we can see here is that Resset is actually solving that problem, because Resset is taking used PCs and reselling them, refurbishing them and reselling them, giving them a longer life. So Resset is implicitly part of a solution to the sustainability issues in this industry. But again, Resset needs to make sure that they aren't also a problem. So do they offer any form of recycling facility to customers who buy from them, and then 3 years' time, they don't want that laptop anymore, and perhaps it's not really good enough to resell at that point? What happens to that laptop? Does Resset offer any recycling? Could they offer recycling? What happens to the products Resset sells when they are absolutely at the end of their life? Of course, as part of sourcing laptops, PCs, desktops. Resset needs to bear in mind they should be sourcing from sustainable sources. They need to be looking at which manufacturers they're buying from. They need to be buying from manufacturers who've got their own sustainability credentials. Similarly, Resset needs to think about carbon footprint of their own organization and energy usage within their one warehouse and distribution center. These are all things which we could touch on later, which are relevant to Resset's business model. I've just noted down at the bottom here, of course, consumer demand for laptops is going to be affected by different things, I think, to business demand for laptops. So performance, yes, but also lifestyle appeal. What is the latest brand name in a laptop PC? Entertainment. What is the type of entertainment that they want to use their laptop for? What kind of software do they want to run? The demand from consumers can be more volatile here. It can be more influenced by trends, by the latest brand in PC, by the new brand that's just arrived, by the latest bit of technology that a particular make of laptop has actually introduced. So there's going to be more volatility, I think. It's going to be more led by brand image, by trends, but also, consumers are going to be influenced by price. Where else could I get a similar laptop to this one, but at a cheaper price? And when we look at the marketplace, we can see that there are alternatives like online marketplaces for the consumer. All type of PC that could be sold in this market is the tablet computer. So tablets, of course, few key points, battery powered, and mainly used for reading files and accessing the internet. Obviously highly portable with a smaller screen, so there's that trade-off. And you can type either through a touch-sensitive screen, or you can buy external keyboards, but they are less powerful than laptops, so not so suitable for playing games. Less versatile because of that lack of power, really. So less applications that can run on them, fewer software that would happily be able to be used on them. But it points out there that assistants in large shops can use tablets in order to check stock levels, for example, advising on product items for customers. So they still have a business use, so businesses will buy them, but perhaps not to the level that businesses buy desktops and laptops. Perhaps there's more demand here from the consumer. Important point about tablet computers, of course, is that because they are battery powered, mostly that's lithium, then at the end of the life of these PCs, there are significant challenges. Significant amounts of lithium in batteries means that at the end of the life of the tablet, these should be collected in, processed, those metals recovered for new batteries. But of course, if that's not what happens, then these are disposed of in a less ethical way. They're going to end up in landfill. There's going to be toxic waste and also loss of resources, such as these specific metals within the tablet computer. So again, lots of sustainability issues here to think about, potentially for the tablet computer that's been sold by Ressett, which then reaches its end of life. What does the customer do with that tablet? Is there anything Resset can do to encourage some kind of recycling, etc.? And I see the possibility of Resset setting up some kind of recycling process for its end users to bring back the tablets that they have bought from Resset or the laptops, and some proper formal recycling process that Resset then does, being a possible opportunity, a scenario in the exam. That could be perhaps something like setting up a recycling centre jointly with FixUp. That could test all kinds of things. It could test us on joint operations, F2. It could test us on negotiation skills, negotiating this joint venture with FixUp. It could test us on KPIs for how to monitor the effectiveness of this recycling processing plant. So possibilities there for a sort of sustainability type of scenario. Again, testing us on all those key areas of E2, F2 and P2 that this exam is going to cover. Also pointing out here, E2, digital disruption, the fact that software applications are constantly evolving, the fact that now we have such a significantly greater use of things like AI, augmented reality. There are so many new digital disruptions going on now in our world that means the hardware is going to have to change. It's going to have to be able to accommodate all these things. There's going to be new peripherals, new consumables to be needed. Digital disruption and the constant change in technology impacting on hardware, I think is a really important point. And remember, digital disruption is part of E2, could be tested in this exam. And, it could be tested in a variety of ways. But for example, I was just thinking of some kind of AI application for the testing of the PCs that Ressett has bought in. So when it buys in, it needs to check the quality of PCs that are secondhand, that are used, and some kind of AI application that can do that testing really reliably would perhaps be some kind of project investment that Resset might consider. And that would take us into investment appraisal, and it would take us into funding, for example. It points out on the right here, of course, that tablets being the smallest, lightest, most portable, very flexible, used in healthcare, restaurants, education, logistics, lots of uses where we need not significant, powerful applications, but we need portability, we need flexibility, we need to be able to carry this around. There's lots of examples that you can read, that you can find of different businesses and the way they use tablet PCs today. I thought it was quite interesting that Stagecoach, an engineering company, bought 1,500 tablets for its engineering teams that are located, spread on different sites. You can imagine the nature of a construction site, an engineering site. There isn't going to be somewhere for a big desktop or even a laptop, but tablets to enable those teams to communicate effectively back to the centre, to be able to operate in conditions where laptops and desktops just would not be viable, is such a great example of use of tablet computers within the business environment. A final point to think about when it comes to desktops, laptops, and also tablet computers is that what's obviously suggested in this PC is that Resset is a reseller. It sells them. But we must not forget that in F2, we cover IAS 16 leases. In particular, we cover lessor accounting. So that made me think, well, is there a potential scenario here where Resset might lease out PCs, perhaps in bulk, to a business? And of course, it's absolutely true that business customers can choose to lease or rent rather than purchase outright. And that would make a good scenario again, wouldn't it, in the exam? Again, it could test us on negotiating a contract with a business to lease our PCs. It could test us on the accounting as a lessor. It could test us on contract negotiation. It could test us on leadership of a project to establish Resset as a lessor. So lots of different aspects could be tested, but an interesting scenario, I think. Now, we must always remember, as we are reading about these PCs and the consumables that we're about to look at, that we are not supposed to be an expert in PCs. We are not finding out about all these PCs in order to be tested on how does a PC work. We are just getting the background so that we understand what's possible for Ressett. What opportunities could be tested? What do they need to consider? What stock management issues are there? That's why we need to understand about the details here. So if we move on to peripherals, these are the add-ons, aren't they? The extras that you might need if you've got a PC. So it points out there, nice little list of things like printers, scanners, external hard drives. One point I thought immediately here is inventory management, P2. It's going to be really important for Resset if they're going to supply peripherals with PCs that they have the stock, because it could put off a customer who wants to buy a PC and a printer if they can't get the printer. So inventory management, managing carefully to avoid stock outs, but also minimizing stock holding costs, an important aspect of operational efficiency, I think. So something again that could be tested. Consider things like economic order quantity. Consider bulk purchase for cost savings. But on the counter side to that, then we've got the stock holding costs. And also, if we bulk purchase items like printers or even PCs, desktops, laptops, etc., we run increasing risk then of some of those models that we have bought becoming obsolete. Thinking also about just in time and how much stock of these peripherals does Resset actually hold? We don't know that. Is there more of a possibility of a just in time approach for some of these peripherals as a way of better managing inventory? Now, now, also, when we look at these peripherals, pricing. Let's think about this one. Does Resset sell peripherals as well as PCs? Yes, they do. Do they sell them together, bundled up? And here I'm thinking about the pricing aspect of that. Uh, Cross-selling higher margin peripherals with desktops, laptops, etc., could increase margins. So to what extent does Resset actually try to cross-sell these peripherals? Could they bundle them up, make a higher margin? So pricing issues there, but also, of course, if we are bundling up various different items, we'd also then perhaps think about revenue recognition, IFRS 15, because if there is a bundling of items together, including perhaps warranties or support services, we would have a revenue recognition accounting issue to deal with. Absolutely F2 knowledge that you should make sure you have refreshed. There's also consumables to consider. So these are the things that would be used up by a customer. They don't last, they're used up, consumables. Related to printing, so paper, ink cartridges. This made me think what a great opportunity perhaps to generate more predictable cash flows for Resset if they adopted some kind of a subscription model for the consumables, the ink cartridges delivered on a monthly basis, paper, similar. Again, subscriptions would mean revenue recognition issues. Again, there'd be pricing to consider. There'd be KPIs for this needed. There'd be management of a project. So lots of possible things that could be tested, but most definitely something that in the real world does happen, that there are subscription models for things like paper and ink. Final point at the bottom, of course, is that, gosh, yes, when we think about inventory management and obsolescence, we don't just have to worry about the laptops, desktops, and tablets we might have in inventory. We also have to worry about the peripherals. We have to worry about print cartridges, ink cartridges that we might have in stock for a printer that suddenly is obsolete and nobody wants. So inventory management, absolutely, definitely a critical issue, I think, for Resset. Now, if we just move on to look at the couple of graphs that we're given, we can see the retail market for PCs in Lamland and the revenue from it over the last 9 or so years. A couple of years here at the forecast, so 2026, 2027. And what can we see from this graph? So what I think we can definitely see is this is a mature market. In Lamland, this is not a growing market. And what does that mean? In a mature market, it means the competition is going to be based on price. That's what's going to be a really critical factor for customers. There's no growth here. So any growth by any companies in this industry is going to have to be generated through differentiation, new ways of doing things, new offerings, new services. So that's why, thinking about things like subscription ink services, thinking about extended warranties, thinking about support services as separate income streams is something that Resset might well be considering. New products. So currently we're thinking of PCs and their peripherals and consumables. But what about things like mobile phones? Would it be too different to go into the purchase of used phones and the selling of used phones? And, one could argue really also that the phone is very much like a small mini computer. The amount of functionality you've got there is really high. So I don't think that would be too big a step. So going into new related product areas could be on the table for Resset. Market segments, new market segments. So potentially there, is there a segment of the market that currently is undersupplied with PCs? And perhaps the next graph will let us think about that. Perhaps we could go more into one of the usage segments. So we could go more into gaming, or we could go into specifically thinking about supplying businesses who need portable hardware for off-site use. Perhaps we should differentiate by targeting a specific segment of the market. Or we've already mentioned, what about going overseas, geographical markets? This is Lamland. Next to Lamland, we could have a country with a completely different industry profile. It might not yet be in maturity. So going overseas might again be a possibility. Now, when we look at the financials for Resset, which we do a bit later, we can see that there's only Resset and Fix Up that are resellers in Lamland, and Resset is bigger. So Resset has more than 50% of the market for the resellers. If we just look at the sales of PCs in Lamland, of course, Resset is small because they're just a little reseller. They're not a big retailer. They're not a manufacturer who also sells directly. So in terms of the whole of this market, Resset has a very small percentage, 2.6% of this market, but over 50% of the reseller market. I think it's important, though, to appreciate that Resset is in competition with retailers. It is in competition with the manufacturers of PCs who sell direct to the public. So seeing how small Resset is in this whole market, I think, is of value. Now, if we wanted to investigate, is there any sector of this market in Lamland that we could pursue because there's not a significant PC ownership and we could perhaps sell into that more? Well, this graph, I think, makes it clear that in reality, each segment by age in Lamland would appear to be saturated. We can see all of the under 54-year-old segments, over 70%, if not 80% of that segment owns PCs. And it's only when we go up to the much older segment that we see that that's, reduced. So really, is there a segment here that we could go, right, this is underdeveloped, Resset could really start marketing to that segment? I don't think there is that opportunity here. And knowing that the market is mature and looking at the ownership of PCs by age, I think we can also see that consumer sales are going to be driven by the need for replacement of whatever PC one has. So that's going to be driven by innovation of PCs and of the manufacturers, of new brands perhaps arriving, which have different levels of reputation, ease of use, so PCs which develop ease of use facilities, and also as consumers are far more ethically minded and sustainability minded than they were, sustainability factors will drive demand as well. It will drive replacement, a bit like electric car demand is driving the replacement of fossil fuel powered vehicles. It's that replacement with a better, more sustainable technology. So consumer sales driven by replacement, business sales we've already talked about. So I'm just thinking again, what if Resset decided to focus only on one of those? What if it decided to stop selling to the consumer? And what I also then thought about is, does Resset actually know how much it costs to sell to a consumer versus selling to a business? And I've written down somewhere on this pre-scene activity-based costing. Does Resset understand the costs of all the various process it does? Can it relate that to the various different products or customers it sells to? Does it really understand where it's getting its profitability from? And might there be a suggestion of focusing, narrowing down perhaps the broad range it sells in terms of its customer base and also its products, in terms of ensuring it has the highest contribution products and customers, and it focuses on those. So a bit of activity-based costing, I think, would also be a possibility here. Now, the final point I've mentioned is customer lifecycle profitability, because we know it's a tight margin industry, and we know here that for consumers, it's replacement of what they have that drives them to buy a new one. So the benefits to be gained from building a lasting relationship with the consumer to ensure that they come back to Resset to repurchase is huge. This should not be a business that just thinks about, I'm going to make a sale to a customer. It should be about hooking in that customer, building a relationship with that customer, and then getting that customer to keep coming back, to replace the PC, to buy the peripherals, to subscribe to the ink, to buy the training, to buy the extended warranty. So that's what I wanted to pull out here. Now that brings out E2, relationship management, communication, quality of service, lots of factors that we could start to think about how Resset could do these things better and what we know about those areas from our studies.